On the road to see the wizard, they're going to run into some financial conspiracy nuts. I call them nuts because it seems that not many of these people get much sympathy from the non-believers. I'm here to prevent a civil war from one side than the other. Okay, so let me explain a little bit about this financial conspiracy. There's a few things I'm going to have to ask you to understand. There's a difference between money of account and the other kind of money. Only so much of the cash that's out there accounts for the money supply. A lot of it is in the form of credit. And this can be created out of thin air. Cash, I mean, you can only have so much of it. I mean, you got to, you want some of this, you got to dig the copper out of the ground, you know, and that's something tangible. Lawful money, gold and silver, we used to exchange something that had value, but now we're on a fiat dollar. It's been going on. In 1971, Nixon, he closed the gold window. It's something called Nixon shock that you have to look up. At this point, the US dollar was no longer redeemable for gold in international transactions. And they went on to a freely floating exchange rate system. They had something called a dirty float. They had something called a managed. But, like I've explained in some previous videos, I mean, a lot of it is weird because the value of one currency to another is based on its relationship with the other country's currency. And it's been that way ever since. That's why gold's been going up like that. Because it's not the gold that's going up, it's these fiat dollars that you're printing out of thin air that cause the relative value of the gold to rise. And you would think that you would see this by comparing the US dollar index with gold, but the US dollar index only compares the American dollar to the euro. It's more of this. You have one company that creates money out of thin air. You take the eroding value of that, and you compare it with the eroding value of another country that creates their currency out of thin air. What's this creating money out of thin air you think you talk about? Well, you gotta go back to 913, Federal Reserve Act. I shouldn't talk about too much of this, because this is all over the place. There's a lot you can read about this. But what it is that the Fed actually does? Well, they say the Fed is a private corporation. Imagine a bunch of guys around a round table. That's the board of directors. And each of them has a bank. And a certain part of the pie, each of these shareholders, they have to put in a little bit to have this base. Like, they don't receive dividends or anything. It just goes back to these member banks. Each of their member banks get to create money out of thin air by using the fractional reserve system. They only have to have 10% of, like, the things that they can lend out another 90 if you give them, because like you only need to keep 10% of it on reserve. Well, they can lend out 100 if they are holding $10. You get into a funny thing. The concept of potential money. This is a money of account thing. Money that has been created, but it isn't really like being held by anybody yet. It doesn't exist as money. Nowadays, you know, you can say that money of account, the credit, it might as well exist because you can pay your bills with it and people accept that as as currency. That's where we're at now. This is just the way it is. You know, we're not talking about lawful money anymore. Oh, and backing up, I'm also going to show you later on that the ever-rising price of gold and silver, believe it or not, is due to a speculative bubble. Figured it out. And this speculative bubble is going to go all the way to the top, as this will always reach towards its intrinsic value, which is 0. And this stuff this is 0. This stuff is 1s and 0s. This stuff, at least you still might have some change laying around that could be melted down and redeemed for something. You gotta look into your bubbles. There's a quadrillion-dollar derivatives bubble. These are contracts that are out there, gambling in the stock market, where if these things get cashed in, then it will become money, and the effects on the money supply will be disastrous. This is the credit default swaps thing. After Greece defaults, there's going to be 50 trillion in credit default swaps across the world that all of these banks are going to have to create out of thin air to be able to pay, because they have insurance. It's a form of insurance, credit default swaps. The student loan bubble's almost $1 trillion. Social Security, that's probably not really potential money, because that's supposedly money of account. Like, that's all in a fund somewhere, right? We just keep dipping into it for others. Oh, and don't forget the off-the-books assets, like you can hide it in a Swiss bank account on the Cayman Islands. Things that you sell through your yard sales are off the books. There's a lot of money in this. There's an underground economy that is even bigger than the economy that you hear about on CNN. You have no idea how deep this financial conspiracy really goes. They just took a huge amount of fake treasury bonds from somewhere in Italy. U.S. treasury bonds, 1934. They're all fake. So I'm going to explain how these people fit into this whole thing. So the victims of foreclosure and credit cards, they're looking for debt relief. So they go searching on this stuff on the internet, and they're sorting through all this other stuff. They get so much information from all these different groups, and how do you sort through it all? Most of the time what happens is, as soon as you learn about the Illuminati, you spend all of your time on it. It consumes your life. Some people, they dismiss some of these things as nonsense, and maybe some of these things are. There's a lot of truth in each of them, depending on your interpretation of things. So these people are looking for debt relief, and they run into, why don't you declare sovereignty? Or, if not, using some of the techniques that sovereigns could be using anyway. So let me tell you a little bit about how these people got into this mess, and how this can help them out. Okay, so person A wants to purchase something from person B, but they don't have enough money. So they go to the bank, which we'll call person C. The bank issues them a credit card that when person B swipes, then it goes through the internet and goes through all this other stuff, and eventually, days later, it goes to the bank. Well, maybe not days later, it goes to the bank, and on their account, it says that A paid B $300. person A gets the item that they want from person B. Person B, well, in their bank account, Bank D, they are notified by this whole thing, and in their data, Alice paid Bob $300 minus a reasonable fee. Let's say he got $290, and that's generous. So he just made $10 for just authorizing it, just for going through. So this is all that happened. A trade was made, or a perceived trade was made. The transaction was made in their minds. Person B swipes his card because he trusts that he's going to get $290 in his account, and he does. So what happened here? Bank C authorized a transaction. They told the computer when it went back, yes, transaction approved. Then you sign your little thing, and you're like, oh, yeah, you gotta sign here. Oh, can you show me some ID? Okay, yeah, sign here. Okay, yeah, and that is just a formality. The reality of this is, that is just a formality. The reality of this is, according to the law school dropouts, that when you get to a court case where you actually need them to produce one of these signatures on some receipt of something that I signed, why is Bank C unable to provide this, or Bank D unable to provide this? I mean, it can't just sit in a pile and be discussed. What does happen? I mean, some businesses keep them for 30 days, some of them keep them forever. What's the significance of signing that thing? And for some of these groups, the law school dropouts, a religious extremists, maybe the scam artists, but what they say is that your signature is what creates the money. Now, here's the funny thing. Bank C didn't pay Bank D. No, they merely authorized a transaction between A and B, and D got the message and added $290 onto his balance sheets. At the end of the day, through the Federal Reserve, everybody squares up. Lots of info. Lots of money gets created, sometimes money gets destroyed, usually money gets created. But it just gets moved around a lot. And they take their fees, and these fees are multiplied exponentially. And the fat guys, sitting on the top, beneath the guys who are working the computers, these computers that are being used by every business that deals with credit cards. It's a lot of money for other people's work. If Alice paid Bob with cash, Bob would have $300 in Federal Reserve notes, which are also printed by the Federal Reserve, and it's fake. But you can use them to authorize transactions, so we trust it, and it works as currency. So what about the $300? You say Bank C lent the $300? No, they just took $300. They just put a negative $300 on their balance sheets. So the Fed is like, oh, we have to send you $300 now. So they get $300. Where did the Fed get it? They created it out of thin air. or at least authorize the bank to create it out of thin air. Since the bank is since the bank is required to keep only 10% of what they loan out, then that means the bank can now loan out $2,700 to person E. So this person takes their credit card and they go to Bob and they're like, Bob, I've been really wanting to buy that outboard multi-band tube compressor. Sure. Sign here, please. Bank C authorizes the transaction. Bank F, who's connected to the grid. Okay, so they get a negative 20. Wait a second. No, it was Bank C. They get a negative 2,700. The Fed gives them the 2,700 the next day, and then they can loan out. And before you know it, so this is money magic. Through money of account, these banks are just creating, like, the numbers get larger and larger. So then they need to make some investments because they gotta launder some of this money. They gotta get it out of there. That's what we do. We build houses. We build houses and we build buildings and we put them in wherever we can fit them. And then they gotta try to get people to mortgage out these. They gotta get them to mortgage them. They gotta do it. These people are on the phone every day under immense pressure to make these contracts happen, so the guys on the top can give them a good review so they might be able to get a raise. So they start making bad contracts, they make bad investments, and it all blows up in their face. And it kind of hurts every single person that's holding the dollar. It hurts every single person that's holding the dollar, because now all the money like our dollars, the value of our dollar will go down compared to the other currencies. But they're going to be eroding too. It's a magical musical chairs game that's going to end when gold and silver eventually reach infinity, and money's not going to be able to buy you anything anymore. But that's what this documentary is about. That's what this I'm going to prevent all of this. This is just one part of the war of 2012, and they want me to do something about it. I'm going to tell you everything I know. We're going to figure this out, okay? Stay tuned for my next video, which is an introduction to the people that need to escape from the prison system.